Hey, everybody. My name is Sepehr Vakil. I'm an associate professor here in CESP, the School of Education and Social Policy at Northwestern University. And I'm also the faculty director for our new Masters in Technology, People, and Policy program, otherwise known as MTePP. Today, I am really pleased to welcome and be in conversation with two of our newest MTePP faculty. Nicol Turner Lee, who I'll introduce first, is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. She is currently serving as the director for the Center of Technology Innovation. And she's also the co-editor-in-chief of the Tech Tank blog and the Tech Tank podcast, which I'm an avid listener of. I highly recommend it. In 2023, I was going to say last year, but it's already almost 2 years ago, 2023, Nicol developed and launched the AI Equity Lab, which is focused on advancing inclusive, ethical, non-discriminatory, and democratized AI models and systems throughout the United States, as well as in the global South, including the African Union, India, Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, and Latin America. Super pleased and excited to welcome you, Nicol. Our second guest today is Nik Marda. Nik is currently at Mozilla, where he is serving as the technical lead of AI governance. Previously, he has worked at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy in the Biden-Harris administration, where he served as the chief of staff of the tech division and as a policy advisor in the National AI Initiative Office. He's also from Minnesota and drinks a lot of caribou coffee. I won't hold that against you, Nik. Nicol, welcome to you both. I just want to start really quick by saying, I am personally just over the moon to have a chance to work with you all in MTePP, to build with you all. We've already had several conversations. I'm so excited to learn from you and collaborate with you both. So welcome to each of you, and let me just take this opportunity to kind of transition into a question that allows you all to kind of introduce yourself even further to our CESP community. So I guess the question I have is, let's start with the current work that each of you are doing in the tech policy space. Nik, can we start with you?
Sure, and thank you for having both of us today, and also as part of this awesome program and faculty. I'm really excited to be here. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm working on right now at Mozilla, which broadly fits in the bucket of trying to steer AI both toward more beneficial applications that aren't being developed yet, and also trying to mitigate the risks from the AI applications that we're seeing deployed in the world today. And the part of that I focused on is, how do you increase transparency and public engagement and participation in that ecosystem? So I'll talk about two bits of that. One is around open source AI, which is a phrase that refers to essentially AI systems that anyone can build, use, share, modify without permission, without paying for it. And the idea here is basically that, like we saw in the early era of the internet, that there can be these building blocks of the digital ecosystem that aren't gatekept by a few big tech players, by a few companies, by a few entities in general, but rather we can create these building blocks that everyone can use, and you can make it easier for everyone to have a role in creating the future of AI. And this doesn't just matter for the innovation side of things to enable folks to be able to build and use AI more cheaply and more efficiently. It also matters for a lot of the safety and ethics issues that you see around AI today. Because doing this out in the open with this kind of transparency allows folks around the world to look at these AI systems and find issues with them and help flag them for being fixed, and often actually just contribute fixes directly. And it also increases our global scientific understanding of how these AI systems work. So if we try to think about how do we develop policy around AI over the next 3, 5, 10 years to tackle the long-term consequences of increased AI integration into society and the increasing capabilities of these AI systems, it helps to have this transparency into how these AI systems work. And so at Mozilla, I'm spending a lot of my time thinking and working on open source AI issues to help essentially increase that transparency, both for the innovators and builders, but also for the safety side of the conversation and for the policymakers as well. The other bit that I'm deeply focused on right now is this idea that we call public AI. And this concept is essentially about increasing public infrastructure and public goods for AI. And that's a little bit of a mouthful. So let me try to break down what that means in more simple terms. So, you step outside and say in your city, and you step outside and you see uh, a road that has both cars and buses on it, right? Or you turn on your TV and you can both see NBC and PBS, right? One is a private network and one is a public broadcaster. And you see these examples throughout society where you can choose between using private uh, products that are operating on our shared infrastructure or using public products that operate on your shared infrastructure. And there are different times when you might choose one over the other, right? It might be based on your ownership of a car or not, right? So there's some sort of financial and socioeconomic dimensions to that. Or it might be based on whether you're trying to go from location A to location B. And that route might be, for example, taking you out into a very rural area that doesn't have bus service. So you use a private car, right? So there are all these examples from technologies of the past that have this important public counterpart to private innovation that fills a need that the private ecosystem isn't incentivized to fill, right? So think about like the US Postal Service helping bring mail to parts of the country that like might get neglected otherwise if it was left just in the hands of private mail carriers. And that's why we need something similar for the AI ecosystem, because there's so much possibility with using these data-driven techniques to analyze all sorts of rich data about society for public applications, right? To find new cures for diseases, to tackle important climate issues. But a lot of those problems don't have a huge commercial incentive behind them. And so, how do you incentivize that sort of development without it necessarily being profitable to begin with? And that's where this public ecosystem comes in. And so, a large part of my work is focused on how do you steer public investments and public incentives toward creating an ecosystem where you can build beneficial AI applications, even if they're not profitable in the short term.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. That's incredible. I think we both have follow-up questions, but let's go to Nicol and learn a bit about what you're up to these days at Brookings.
So great to be here with both of you and just very excited to be on the faculty. I'm actually a Northwestern alum, so I'm coming back
Welcome back. Welcome back.
Campus, right, to be able to teach this course. So couldn't be more excited. I was in the sociology department where I received my doctorate a very, very long time ago. With that being said, I'm particularly interested in, AI and technology more generally based on the work that I'm doing at the Brookings Institution. Brookings is a global think tank that's headquartered in Washington, D.C. We've got a 100-plus-year history sort of working on issues that matter to policymakers as well as industry and civil society. And what that means overall, I think everyone at some point in their life consumes some content from the Brookings Institution. In my particular role as a senior fellow and the director of the Center for Technology Innovation, I am interested in the legislative as well as regulatory requirements that come in the advancement of the innovation sector. I've got a new book out. It's on the broadband digital divide. It's basically a journey that I took prior to the pandemic and something that, as a matter of fact, that I started to do while I was a student in Chicago, working in community technology centers, where I'm able to sort of map out when the digital divide actually started, mapping it across political administrations to where we are today. And it's really important for those of you that are interested in tech policy, and I'll talk just a moment about, hopefully we'll talk in the podcast about the course that I'll be teaching, that there are origins to the state of innovation that we have in the United States as well as globally. The other things that I'm working on outside of closing the digital divide involve closing the artificial intelligence gap. And what I mean by that is really looking at AI from the perspective of how do we develop models that are non-consequential when it comes to eligibility requirements, meaning people's ability to get a home ownership loan, people's ability to gather credit or to have eligibility for healthcare programs that do not necessarily tax them based on the structural and systemic inequalities that may define them externally from the internet. When I say that, as part of our AI Equity Lab, We're looking at issues related to education. What does it mean when you actually deploy artificial intelligence tools in a classroom, but yet it's a classroom that may be in a predominantly African American or Latina school where there are some certain stereotypes or profiling that's happening as we teach young people? AI systems, in many respects, do not discriminate when it actually accesses publicly available information. And that information, in and of itself, in the research that I do, may be traumatized or hold a series of presumptions and stereotypes around communities that can ultimately deny that young person their ability to thrive within that classroom or in society. So I spent a lot of time there. I spent a lot of time looking at this intersection of tech and society. I spent a lot of time thinking about ways in which we actually develop much more equitable and democratized systems, and how we look at the socio-technical value behind artificial intelligence and other deployed technologies that combine whatever the sociological implications might be, that's my background, and what we see as the technical cadence around how we actually develop and design those products and services. And so for me, this intersects with the digital divide, because if you don't have access, you may not actually be using AI. And so very curious to see how we explore these themes and many others as we go into the course that I'll be teaching. And in particular, for those of you that may be saying to yourself, I have to be highly technical to do this work, you do not. As a sociologist, I came into this work, again, from my disciplinary perspective, which I believe actually suggests more disciplines need to be at the table when we are designing and interrogating these technological models, especially as they become much more advanced. So I'm going to stop because, I can talk and I can talk about this all day, but happy to be on the podcast.
I have a follow-up question for you. So to our listeners who might not be familiar with the curriculum for MTePP, you're going to be teaching in the fall quarter. Next year, we have our first cohort coming in. Next year, we're right in the middle of the application and admission seasons right now. And you're going to be teaching a course in the fall it's an introduction, it's a foundations to technology policy with an emphasis on the global perspective.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the course, and specifically what are the critical global issues in conversations about technology policy that really stand out to you and that are going to be part of that foundation course?
So it's so funny. I've actually been working on this class, so I probably have a lot more to articulate, much more clear as we actually come up with the final syllabus in the next couple of weeks. So, tech policy generally really has to start with tech history. And so I think it's going to be really important for anybody who's taking this course to know that you'll get some level setting and some foundational principles on how do we get here. Obviously, technology in and of itself has been applied in so many industry sectors, from the automotive industry to healthcare industry. But there's some general understandings about communications policy that sort of factored into where we are today when it comes to the state of innovation. So I'm looking forward to giving some of that history and some level setting on how we started with just the ecosystem of communication. Some people don't realize that much of the legislative background that we have when it comes to tech policy emanates from the Communications Act of 1934, when the telegraph was actually created. And I think we're way beyond the telegraph, unless somebody out there has one in their basement that I would like to actually personally see, because I haven't had a chance to see the telegraph. I'm not that old. I'm old, but not that old. The other things that I think are going to be fundamental to the course is, once we understand this transition from analog to more digital systems, the extent to which we also understand how that actually was democratized. So I do hope to spend some time digging into some of the content of my book. For those of you who've been taking the class, Digitally Invisible, How the Internet Created the New Underclass is my new book title. But it also delves a lot into how do we transition from something that was very much in-person, tactile, to something that is much more digitally motivated. From there, you can then branch into different policy concerns. And so as a policymaker myself for the last 30 years, there's obviously some that reach the public domain that are worth talking about in the class. Competition policy being one, really understanding domestically how competition has driven the marketplace to where we are today, whether based on opportunity or failure. Consumer privacy being another area of focus. Thinking through just infrastructure, supply and demand, and where we are today, as well as the evolution of technology from more advanced, capable systems and platforms like social media to where we are with AI will be covered in the class. This has global implications, Sepehr, to your point. What that means is we've done a lot of level setting in the domestic context of what tech policy is, and we spent a lot of time. And hopefully students will spend some time, right, digging into these areas of competition policy, innovation policy, etc. But globally, there are other conversations that are happening. One great example that I'll bring into class, for example, is on data privacy. We are so behind the United States when it comes to the passage of what a federal privacy standard looks like. But in the European Union, 3 or 4 or 5, 6 years ago, they've already passed what data privacy should look like for their citizens, which has implications on the prior areas and spokes that I previously discussed that we'll talk about in the class. I think it's also important globally that we do some digging into bias and how that shows up as well in the global context. So many of the models that we talk about with tech policy tend to be very US based. It's my hope that we will conclude the class with some understanding of the cultural nuances that factor into how these technologies sort of are embraced, designed, and deployed within both domestic and global context. So I'm looking forward to sort of looking at some of the generative AI, for example, where we are with policy, and some of the cultural linguistic capabilities that are missed when we don't think about how they interact with global context, or how we look at competition and where we're seeing products and services show up in very localized indigenous communities where we have less of a burden of some of the regulatory regime that we have here in the United States. So if you're taking my class, this is truly like an intro to tech policy course that will essentially lead you into some level setting that I know my colleague Nik and others are going to pick up on, but you'll have some fundamental basis for that. And in particular for the MTePP program, you'll have some basis for how this actually shows up in the field of education and learning sciences. So I've got a big charge you gave me, my friend. I promise everyone it won't be a lot of reading and a lot of papers, but just enough to keep you busy for the full semester. But I'm excited about the course because this is an area, again, that when I left Northwestern as a graduate student in sociology, where I live and I learn and I thrive. So hopefully you'll come on that journey with me.
Beautiful, fascinating, and what a time to be digging into those issues. Let me bring Nik back into the mix here. So Nik, your course that you're designing and customizing for the MTePP program is focused on navigating AI and data governance. So first of all, what is AI data governance? Can you just explain that in simple terms? And why do tech policy professionals need to understand that and be competent in that area?
So AI governance and data governance refers to the full ecosystem of processes that ensure that AI and data are used responsibly. I think it's easiest to describe it with a number of examples. So it includes public policy, so rules, laws, regulations that require companies, for example, to use AI systems in certain ways or to protect data in certain ways, right? Like Nicol mentioned, GDPR, the privacy law in Europe, as an example of this sort of public policy intervention to promote better data governance. But it doesn't just mean public policy. It also means things like technical standards. So the processes, the rules that companies use when they develop their own products that are often voluntary, right? It's companies saying we're going to release information about this AI system in this standardized format. And we're going to have other companies in the ecosystem also roughly do the same thing. And this matters too for ensuring AI data are used responsibly, because it's creating these norms around, we expect all companies to release this sort of information, and then people can look at that information, comment on the safety of a system, the reliability, et cetera. It also includes testing practices within companies. So, you're building an AI system. What are the things you do internally to test, audit, ensure that an AI system works the way you expect, that it doesn't show, for example, differential performance on different groups of people based on their demographic background? So that also counts as AI and data governance. I'll give one more example that I think sort of stretches the imagination a little bit. Um, I also think of AI and data governance as being not just sort of the life cycle of building and using and deploying an AI system, but also the sort of uh, amorphous set of actors that surround that as well. And that includes civil society, that includes journalists. It's the folks who, for example, advocates who see that an AI system is, for example, demonstrating that sort of biased output that I was describing in a consequential use case, right? So if it's an AI system being used to determine who gets unemployment insurance and who doesn't, there have been advocates in many states who have said, "Hey, that AI system is biased or is kicking people off these roles that shouldn't be kicked off." And the folks that advocate there are also a part of this AI and data governance ecosystem of saying, like, "Hey, we're not using AI correctly here. We're pointing out the problem and we're putting pressure on the right spots to help intervene and fix that problem." And often good journalism or good advocacy is the actual instigator for changing how an AI system or a data process is used. So bringing this back to the question of um, why this matters for tech policy professionals, I think it matters both big picture because AI and data are becoming so common in business practices, in decision making, in basically products across society. And so it matters that we figure out how to do that responsibly. And we've already seen so many examples over the past decade of places where AI or data is used irresponsibly. And it's not just the sort of more AI flavored examples like bias and privacy that we were talking about, but it's also things like cybersecurity, right? Is your data being protected when you put your sensitive, health information into a data system that is trying to, in your best interest, share it across, vendors and hospitals, but in practice, if you're not doing the sort of data governance work that needs to be done there, right, you're putting people's vulnerable information at risk, right? So it's this really broad notion of it matters because AI and data are being used in so many different parts of society for so many high risk and consequential decisions and processes, and that we need folks in all of these parts of the ecosystem to understand the ethical and societal implications of what they're building and using and taking steps to mitigate the risks there, right? This is not just a problem for public policy. It's also a problem for if you're sitting in a company building an AI system, or if you're sitting at a nonprofit that's using consequential or sensitive data about people, right? In all of these contexts, it matters that you have the skills that a tech policy professional would ideally be developing in a course like this in order to mitigate those risks in practice.
What strikes me when I hear both of you talk is, damn, I wish I had access to this kind of learning so I finished my master's in engineering at UCLA in 2007, and I did my master's thesis in an AI lab in an electrical engineering department. And I was really exactly the kind of student who was searching for opportunities to think about the technology right? How do I think about the technology as it permeates all aspects of life? And that kind of educational pathway just didn't exist, and the conversation didn't really exist back then. And so I'm so excited to be able to give access to our students to the kind of expertise and topics and themes that, whether it's for people who are coming from a technical or STEM background, whether it's in computer science or engineering or otherwise, and they want to continue to work in tech, but they want to really work on questions of technology as it relates to society, as it relates to equity, as it relates to ethics and data privacy and governance. And that there's a pathway for them and there's a way to prepare them for that kind of career, for that kind of future in tech policy. Or if there are people who have kind of built their career or have really thought about themselves as really being located more in the public policy, social policy landscape, but are in the last few years really realizing that they want to do public policy, but with an emphasis or an anchor in technology. I really love the way Alondra Nelson talks about technology as a horizontal force, that we can't think of it as separate from the policy domain space anymore, that it's really a horizontal force that's intersecting with all aspects of life, from democracy to business to culture. and beyond. And that's sort of the essence. And I think the kind of topics that both of you touched on really reflect that. All right, let me ask you guys a final question that sort of tries to situate this conversation that we're having right now, but also the MTePP program as it launches and opens its doors, in the fall of 2025, right? And so let's situate that a little bit in the historical moment and the political moment, right? As the ground beneath our feet, continues to rapidly shift in the current chaotic atmosphere that we're in, and the obstacles to governance and questions of regulations of technologies like AI. Well, let's just say there's many obstacles to those efforts. What kinds of jobs can our MTePP students who graduate from this program anticipate, or what kind of framework should they be holding in mind as we prepare them in this particular moment in time?
Well, I mean, I think definitely in terms of where the program will impart very useful skills for students will definitely be in a job market that will be looking for people who have some expertise in this area. And as I mentioned before, I mean, I'm laughing when you talk about, I wish in my master's program at UCLA, I mean, I was at Northwestern. I don't think we had a digital class when I was there. I was actually there so long when the Center for Urban
Because you were in sociology. What does sociology have to do with technology?
I
what
know.
does sociology have to do with technology?
Listen, okay. And I was at the Center for Urban Affairs, and I think it's named something new right there near campus. I mean, for me, I think the jobs of today clearly are what I'm doing now. I work for a think tank. Never in a million years would I thought I would work for a think tank. I was in advocacy for a period of time, but got to Brookings about 10 years ago. But there were many opportunities I had along the way, whether it was community engagement as a digital activist, whether it was working as an expert to government, whether it was working at a nonprofit organization that was really focused on civil society outcomes when it comes to innovation. I think that there's a pathway, not always linear, but very horizontal, as you mentioned, for the types of jobs that people could go into in this space. I also find in my work, we do a lot of interdisciplinary industry-wide convenings as part of the AI Equity Lab. And I do find that there's more of an appetite of companies to have people who understand the ethical, responsible, and trustworthy nature, as well as inclusive nature of AI systems or any type of technology. And so what I mean by that is there are more opportunities in companies to really have people who are very grounded in the socio-technical expertise in deployment, design, interrogation, accountability of these systems. Much of my work really looks at reputational risk when it comes to either the regulatory or legislative climate. And so for people who are, pursuing the program, there is a plethora of opportunities among, private sector companies in ed tech, companies who are interested in the wraparound services when it comes to, education or other client outputs that are looking for people who sort of have this grounded nature, right, of technology as well as societal construct, coming into their environments, or engineering or quantitative or qualitative modeling.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
it's
Got it.
like, when I first started, I didn't know what I was going to be when I grew up as a sociologist. I have to admit that. I was like, what am I going to do? My parents also asked me, what are you going to do? Right? Because there was only one pathway, which was to go into academia. Well, I did not go into academia. I've actually come back to academia over the course of my career, but I went into other areas in which there was a direct application of what I was actually pursuing when it came to structural inequality and how that plays out, across a variety of contexts. And tech happened to be one of my use cases of most interest. And I think the framework is also very relevant. I think at the end of the day, technology, the train has left the station. We're going to continue to see innovation really be at top of mind. It's going to be an evergreen topic. We all know what's happening right now in terms of, the current political climate, but technology is one of those areas which is either going to enable or it's going to disenable a variety of quality of life indicators, as well as our ability to speak and communicate in ways that make sense. And so, anybody who wants to in some way interface a lot of tech or a little bit of tech will get that in this program. And that's what I appreciate. I've taught a lot of courses before at other universities, and it tends to be very granular, focused on one type of technology. What I see here is, right, is like what you're trying to do is give this foundational context that can go into any type of discipline or workspace where you always keep this top of mind, whether you decide to be an engineer or you decide to be, the clerk in the office. You'll be able to better understand the interfaces of these new technologies and how they actually are implemented and affect people, which unfortunately I didn't have that class. I wish I did, right? And I'm hopeful that this will be just a unique, I don't know many places that are engaging in this kind of conversation. So a big commercial, take the class, right? And take the certificate, take the program, because there are just not a lot of places that are really giving this interdisciplinary, industry specific, both purposeful and pragmatic framework for how you look at issues that are affecting everyday people today, as well as institutions and enterprises. You owe me some money on that plug. But that to me, outside of, our knowing each other over the years, this is really important, I think, rounding out people's expertise.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would love to pick up on that last bit, Nicol, on the fact
on the I owe money part. Who I owe you?
I'm happy to partake in that as well. Take a little slice of that too. But on this bit on the skill set being valuable across more and more spaces now, as this sort of becomes, we're using the word horizontal here. I quite like that as an analogy. As sort of tech permeates throughout society in so many different places, especially in the slice that I'm talking about, AI and data being increasingly used and increasingly labeled in that way, and being viewed as something where we need to think about some of the ethical implications as well. And even in a context where the sort of federal political environment may not incentivize that to the same degree, but there are many different jurisdictions around the country and around the world that will keep pushing forward on incentivizing that. So I don't think it's like, obviously, there is much more that could be done at the federal level on this front, and there may not be as much progress there, but I think there will continue to be an environment that pushes folks to continue prioritizing this type of tech governance work. The bit I wanted to pick up, though, on in particular, is I want to give an example of something I saw in my time at the White House that I thought was quite interesting to this point, which is that in the Obama-Biden administration, which I did not serve in, but I've heard many stories about, the tech expertise was much more concentrated in a couple of offices across the federal government. It was in pockets and places, and the idea was we were sort of bringing this tech expertise in, and like they would sort of go out across the federal government and across different agencies and help them sort of level up on different tech issues. The idea was like you'd bring one of these technologists to the table where decisions were being made, and then informing how those would be implemented. And in the Biden administration, in the Biden-Harris administration, the thing that was noticeably different was that there's tech expertise everywhere.
I know. Yep.
And so there's still these pockets, right? Like I worked in one of these places I would sort of self-describe as a pocket of tech expertise, but we weren't unique in the same way anymore. And this was actually a win, right? We had sort of succeeded across the years in getting more tech expertise spread across the federal government. And so there's still value in having these pockets of expertise to drive on specific tech policy issues, AI policy being a good example of that. But we had spread this tech expertise across the federal government in a way where that meant that there were many people at the table that had some flavor of tech expertise. And I think that reflects the fact that tech is becoming so horizontal and cross-cutting in so many ways that that expertise becomes relevant to many different types of policy conversations, and more broadly, to many different types of leadership and decision contexts. And so to take that back to this course here, right, you might get this expertise in tech policy coming out of here. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to go and do something that is explicitly billed as tech policy. You could go into other contexts, things that we might not even list on the course page as potential careers, but where this tech policy expertise will be super relevant to different aspects of what you're working on, that your colleagues will not be bringing that expertise necessarily. And your value add is, in part, the expertise you're bringing from this curriculum. So I just want folks in this program to broaden their scope of what they think is relevant coming out of this course. Of course, there are many types of jobs that I think are natural fits for this type of expertise. But because tech has become so cross-cutting, I also think that means a tech policy credential has also become quite cross-cutting.
Excellent. That's perfect. Uh, that's a really interesting point in that comparison between what it looked like during the Obama Biden administration versus the uh, Biden Harris administration, and how that's evolving now into the current Trump administration. It's something that we're going to continue to talk about, maybe not now, but when you guys come in to Chicago and we go out for drinks and have even further dialogue on these issues. I do look forward to welcoming you both to MTePP, to Northwestern, to CESP. And, I mean, for sure, of course, over virtual, over the screen, but I can't wait for you guys to come in person, and we're going to talk about some of those details coming up soon. But yeah, I look forward to continuing these dialogues. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Nik. This was a really fun conversation. I'm super excited personally, and I'm really excited for our future MTePP students.